Thank you, Francis, for having me and for meeting my colleagues that we'll be having discussions virtually. I'll be able to see them in flesh. I'm very happy to be in Accra to share some of my concerns. Baktik was talking about, the amount of fish Africa needs to produce so that they can increase their per capita consumption. So I want to look at the impact of the African continental free trade area, the sort of impact. The concern is actually about the increasing informal trade, especially in small-scale fisheries. Because in Africa, there's this, reasoning that we have a dual system, where the industrial fisheries is for export, and then the small-scale fisheries is looked at as a way of providing domestic food fish security. But there is an increasing informal cross-border trade. There is now a lot of export of small-scale fisheries. So the concern is actually what would that do to domestic fish consumption, especially now that we have the African Free Trade Agreement. So I look at the problem, the overview of the AfCFTA and the role of the single currency in all of that, differential exchange rates, how all of that plays. But what is very important in this discussion I want to look at is the growing tendency, number 5, to export small-scale fishes catch and the impact that will have on domestic food fish security. And then I'll come up with some recommendation. The problem, I look at the world per capita consumption is around 20.7, but the African per capita consumption is half of that, more or less, at around 10 kg. And if you look at, relatively, comparatively, that the Northern Hemisphere is wealthier, whereas poverty is sort of pervasive in Africa, and that put fish in a position that is readily accessible and available, but it is increasingly becoming inaccessible with the profound food and nutrition insecurity consequences, because much of it is being exploited. So I try to model fish availability, that it will be production plus import minus export in board. So if export is increasing in that model, then it will have a very serious impact on fish availability. And now, most of the African countries have got balance of payment issues, so to import fish will not be a priority. So I want to look at that increasing export further undermines availability and thus accessibility. That is the problem. So, I just thought I would whet the appetite of African scholars or students in fisheries so that we'll start looking at this, because it is very informal. I'm trying to put a student on this sort of study that will look at the supply chain, but it is important that we look at this distribution of fish. The African continental free trade area, it could be traced to the very African development plan. The African, we'll look at the African SDGs. That is Agenda 2063 is the development plan for Africa. So that, it is important for us to know, especially as African, that our developmental intervention must be contextualized in that development plan. It's a 50-year plan from 2013 to 2063. And, exactly the sort of the roadmap Africa has created for itself, they call it the Africa we want. And in that plan, you have goal 6 of that plan is the blue economy. So that plan also recognizes the blue and ocean economy. They have aspirations. They have 20 goals and 7 aspiration, goal 6 is the blue economy, and goal 1, aspiration 1 also has got listed objectives that also have the blue economy. So the African Development Plan, known as Agenda 2063, recognizes fisheries and blue economy, of which fisheries and agriculture is a very important part, as a way of accelerating the country's development. You know? But the focus here now is to see where the African Free Trade Agreement area comes in. It comes in, at the point that it is a flagship project in trying to achieve the objectives of the Agenda 2063. The plan actually, itemized about 15 projects that they think, if it is being achieved, they can now achieve the goals of Agenda 2063. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is a flagship project of the Agenda 2063. If you look at it, those are the projects they have listed. So the third one is the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's for boosting intra-African trade as an engine of growth and strengthen Africa's trading position in the global marketplace. So that is the project created by the development plan to achieve the objectives of the development plan. We have those other ones, including economic forum, establishment of financial institutions, etc., e-networks, even outer space, virtual learning, etc. They are all part of it, about 15 of them, you know. But the objective of the African Continental Free Trade Area, they have a number of objectives, but the one that I will be concerned with in this presentation is creating a single market for goods and services. Creating a civil market also have to do with currency issues, etc. So that's why I try to look at, in the West Africa now, our single currency aspiration, the ECO. West Africa wants to have an ECO, a single currency, they call it an ECO. So, and how having a single currency, what are the procedures, etc., and how that will affect the movement of the fish commodity. So those are all the other objectives of the Continental Free Trade Area. You know, the sort of things that we do, there will be a sort of either reduction or completely wiping out tariffs, and without tariffs, it will be very easy for commodities to move, and how that will affect certain countries with weaker currencies, and then bigger countries that have stronger economy, and the push or pull factor that will allow a net movement of the commodity to a particular destination, and how that affects the host country. So now, in order to have a free trade area, like in fact, if you compare it to the European Union, that's why how the euro also came about. And so in West Africa, although it had been postponed so many times, but it is expected that this time around, in 2027, West Africa will have a single currency. That will now, sort of help the African Continental Free Trade Area because of those opportunities. There will be a significant increase in trade among currency union partners, enhancing currency stability, reduction of financial risk, transaction costs, reduction of exchange rate fluctuation, because that affects also trade, you know, and improvements in per capita incomes of people in the zone, or countries in the zone, rather. Yes. Now, we have seen the opportunities, but there is a very important threat which I wanted to highlight, that is larger and richer countries will exert a greater gravitational pull on imports and push of exports, while poorer countries, in per capita terms, tend to have a lesser trade. So when you go to the literature, that's the sort of things, we'll have to agree on. There's also the threat of inability of countries to implement, because before you have single currency, you have to implement certain microeconomic criteria. What they call convergence, so that all of you will have a similar characteristics of the economy. But then, because countries will be losing the autonomy of their currency, so it is very difficult to implement those sort of things. But there are some who argue that it's not important to have convergence before free trade, before a single currency market, because the example they refer to is a currency zone in Africa, even before independence, the CFA zone. They never had convergence, but with convergence now, with experience with time, the market seems to have a similar structure. So that was just an argument against that particular issue. And then the issue of the similar production structures actually now ensure that the risk in case of any shock hitting the economies is also very different. So weaker countries will have different risks, shocks compared to richer countries. So these are all the threats for single currency. Well, in the case of the ECO was, that was also the ambition of ECOWAS. ECOWAS was established in 1975. It's a group of 16 countries in West Africa, But, the issue of the single currency has been postponed so many times because of all those convergence reasons I've listed out there. But now it is expected that it could be launched in 2027. Okay. And it failed, again, because of all these factors. There was so much political instability with the war in Liberia, the war in Ivory Coast, the war in Sierra Leone. There was so much instability in the region that those sort of financial developments were not too possible. There was lack of political will. The smaller countries, for obvious reasons, are also worried that they'll be dominated, Revenue loss due to loss of control over your currency, etc. All of those are issues that may have led to the postponement of the adoption of the ECO as a currency. But the important thing is that it is important to note that the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area has been launched and operationalized even before the single currency. So we don't have a single currency yet, but the free trade area has been operationalized. For example, Sierra Leone did its own in 2029, ratified the free trade area, And the stress is on the optimum currency area. They have a number of criteria that you have to satisfy before actually adopting the single currency. Okay? And they are all mostly microeconomic in nature. In terms of inflation, it should be single digits. The fiscal deficit of no more than 4% of GDP. Central bank deficit financing of no more than 10% of the previous year's tax. Gross external reserve that can give an import cover for a minimum of 3 months. So you should have money aside, that can cover your imports for 3 months. All of those things you have to satisfy before you can now converge with the rest of the economy so that you can have a similar structure. But this difference in exchange rate is also one of the issues that is actually will cause a particular commodity to move in a direction of stronger currency. Now that they have operationalized the African Continental Free Trade Area without a common currency. So currencies that are stronger, people want to sell their commodities to currencies that are stronger. And then even if it's food products, for example, in between Sierra Leone and Guinea, 47 metric tons of rice is being exported to Guinea every week, where in fact Sierra Leone have to import rice, because Guinea's currency is now a bit stronger, so people would want to take the rice to Guinea to sell. Likewise, The same argument is being, when we are in Liberia, doing some work in Liberia, there was evidence that fish is being exported to Liberia. Liberia listed Sierra Leone as one of the countries from which they import fish, when in fact in Sierra Leone, there is not enough fish to eat. So, because the Liberian currency is stronger and the Guinean currency is stronger, so you're seeing all these commodities moving in that direction. And because they are informal and cross-border, it is very difficult to quantify. So the essence of this discussion is actually to bring this to the fore of scholars so that, I know this thing is happening in our country, so that we can now try to look at it in a more formal way. So because of lack of single currency, those are the lost opportunities, which are just, which just negate the opportunities are listed, you know. But what I wanted to concentrate on in this discussion is that with or without monetary union, larger countries exert greater force in terms of, importing commodities that they want, or exporting because of just the strength of the economy. Moreover, this currency differentiation that I was talking about, or differential rather, actually have got a net negative impact on small countries. So by the time I look at the Sierra Leone case, how fish commodity is being moved around, then we will now realize that this is something that is of concern because of the importance of fish in the nutritional milieu of small countries, and how that is the commodity that they have access to. That brings me to this issue. The whole discussion actually was about this particular section: the growing tendency to export small-scale fishes catch and the impact of domestic food fish security. You know, it is very important because, the intra-African trade is important, and it is very much active, although it is informal, you know, but a lot of people depend on it for their livelihood, to generate wealth and income, etc. And some studies was done by the African Union, wherein they actually established these trade corridors. In West Africa, you know, the fish trade is dominated by between Dakar and Bamako, Dakar and Mali corridors, 1,300 kilometers of that, linking up to Senegal, processing hubs, you know, to landlocked Mali and Burkina Faso. You know, Ghana's small pelagic fish products also flow to Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire and DRC with informal routes. You know, FAO do those sort of studies. So there are trade corridors being established, that have been discussed, but there are some that are now developing in recent years. The trade corridor between Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia is one that's now very, very, very strong, that because they have international market between all of those countries. In East Africa, you have the Lake Victoria Basin that supplies Uganda, Kenya, tilapia, Nile Park to South Sudan, DR Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. Also go to Mombasa, Goma corridors, China's Kenya marine products to DR, etc. Central Africa, Libreville, N'Djamena corridor, Cameroon, Gabon, Chad. They have those corridors. Up to North Africa, minimal trade is being noticed. But although Egypt imports for domestic demand, while Morocco and Algeria export canned sardines to Europe. So those are, the corridors, we are established. Those are the established corridors that have been identified. But the idea now is that because it is informal, it's ever changing. Some are even, being developed today as we speak. So it's very difficult to put your finger on it. So it's something very dynamic and something you have to be, focused on and trying to trace all the time. If we come to the Sierra Leone case, the actual concern is that there are many concerns in the small-scale fish of Sierra Leone bordering on domestic food security. For example, there was a World Bank project that tried to, we have what we call the inshore exclusion zone. So one of the aim of the project was to make sure that, that inshore exclusion zone that is for small-scale fisheries was patrolled and protected. Once that happened, traditional industrial fishers now outsourced their operations to small-scale fishers as a way of circumventing the policing of the IEZ. One such country is South Korea. South Korea is interested in South Korean operators. They now withdrew from actually harvesting and then form what they call processing units. So they outsource the harvesting to small scale, but then, entice them to sell the product to them. And the species they are very much interested in is croaker, the bobo croaker. It's Pseudotolitmus species. So I traced that species when I was in Freetown up to Yesu in South Korea. Actually, we are out there in the field, we saw the vessel from Sierra Leone bringing in the fish. So I tried to follow up and inquire, why is that South Koreans are interested in that particular species? So they now say that species is very important in their cultural celebrations, etc. So that was a very strong link. They actually go for that species. So therefore now you have a net movement of that species. The fishers only sell to South Korean fishery units, and that's one of the most important fish species in the inshore that for long years that the country has been dependent upon. And then significant volumes, if you have diasporans coming back home on vacation, if they bring 4 boxes of clothes or other cosmetic, etc., they come and give as presents to their families. On their way back, 3 of those boxes will be dry fish. Okay? 3 of those boxes will be dry fish. So, as an economist, I'm looking at the aggregate amount of fish, from all of those sources that actually make their way outside the country. So now you have people in the small-scale fisheries. Those women who are vendors for fish are now they are only smoking fish. So a couple of years ago, you can find maybe 5 or 6. The last time I was in those areas, now I can look at even 50 of those women now. They only dare to dry fish and smoke it to the diasporans. So you see, there's this net movement of fish out of the small-scale fisheries that is of concern. So therefore, in terms of valuation, gross value addition studies of the supply chain, to look at what is the value of those resources being taken out and how that is affecting food security. Already, the per capita consumption is around maybe 10 kilo. So with the African Free Trade Area now, tariffs will be reduced or removed, okay, which will entice cross-border trades, especially with areas with attractive prices, okay? So with or without the free trade area, which our countries are already exerting pressure. Now, there is so much of export for the small-scale fisheries being reported to Nigeria, Guinea, and Liberia from Sierra Leone. So the recommendation is, in all of this was just to raise the concern of an observation. Now we have put about 3 students on this study to actually put figures on it. Is to construct the supply chain of informal and cross-border trade and quantify the volume and value, including from the diasporans. And this should inform policy about the impact on domestic food fish security to prescribe remedies. So this was the concern I wanted to share.